All right, everyone. So today I'm launching Tobalo Talks. This is actually take two. I tried to stream it the first time, and I guess I don't have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm using OBS. It's been a while, and I used to have a community I worked with. They kind of did the setup when we'd record things. But what my goal of the channel is one, for me to learn in public. So just share and talk about things that I'm particularly interested in. I live at the world at the intersection of cyber and economics in my professional life, and I'm very passionate about it, and I think they affect all of us. I'm definitely using this as an outlet to create content, educate, and build in this manner. I also have another personal self-interested reason, and it's because there's also a bottleneck I've noticed in some of my projects, Y2 in specific, but there's just this element of distribution. So if I don't build my audience and I don't get more strategic about how I broadcast myself as a personal human that's kind of and sharing my story about building these things, um, it doesn't help. So obviously, just building a following, sharing the knowledge is really a key part of this. So how am I gonna do it? My main thing is kind of iterate through learning the video production and streaming to YouTube and Twitch, and learning how to do all of that and everything that entails. I have no idea what that means, so I'm definitely gonna have to use all help I can get, but I'm going to make more emphasis on it. So what am I gonna be talking about? There's some open source projects I'm working on. I have Constellation Overwatch. I have the Texas Ontology Protocol. That's kind of two main ones, and then the Fort Worth DAO. Everything we do is open source. We're a non-profit civic educational group that's a DAO, so we're very Web3 and digital sovereignty focused for people for cyber literacy. There's gonna be miscellaneous things, so and one that I'll kind of begin to make content about and actually use as an outlet to also be accountable is something I've seen in my consulting work I do, is that there's this growing disconnect I'm noticing with a lot of these some of these industrial shops that don't have really good software defined networking and data and networking stacks. So it's like analog sensors. This could be radio, Arduino kits stuff. It could be a DROC electrical sensors. And how does that analog ultimately get to a software defined networking stack that lets you do all the big data, cloud tech fun stuff, which is actually more the world I come in. So I'm trying to also just get better at embedded systems, computer architecture, and really understand a little bit more low level programming so that I can translate analog to software defined networking. And the idea is that one, my open source project Pulsar or Constellation Overwatch, which has a edge sync agent, I call it Pulsar, but the idea is it's sort of a data sync that pipes into the Constellation Overwatch mothership. I've started noticing this directly, but I'm curious to explore this in Zig, Go, Rust, C, Odin, and how this works at a very fundamental level in the logic I write. So, and then also just Y2, the Fort Worth DAO, and my personal journey amongst other related things and things I feel like writing about and I want to get out into the world. This is kind of my main launch of this channel. This is sort of, I guess, my official mental model where I'm trying to at least do one video a week, and we'll figure out how it goes from there. But before I wrap this up, I want to share a story about what I call is my market and investor puberty moment. And a little bit of a backstory is that I was teaching myself a lot of economics after I graduated school. So I'd go to work, I'd listen to Bloomberg Surveillance every morning in the podcast. I used to have like hour drives. I eventually moved a little bit closer, got less, but I was very focused on understanding the mechanics of the global economic system from a systems thinking perspective. So I wanted a very mechanical understanding and sort of intuitive, simple understanding of the high inputs, outputs, the elements and the properties of it that influence those inputs and outputs. And long story short, I learned through the big business cycles, or sort of waves of business cycles. There's credit expansion, credit contraction, And that's sort of the predication of the amount of dollars that's in the system that builds our GDP, and the amount of services and loan the business gets done is ultimately predicated on the dollars that are out there and the debt that is created. Took a while to kind of really just understand that, but so I learned through the business cycle of the dot-com boom. There's 2001, that blew up. That was some of the investment banks had to get swallowed and bailed out by the big banks. Fast forward to 2008, the great financial crisis, and those collateral debt obligations tied to junk mortgage loans then had the big banks had to get bailed out by the Treasury, and then plus the other sort of major prime Federal Reserve banks, JP Morgan and such, had to swallow those. And fast forward after that, Federal Reserve interest rates were very low. So one thing I noticed was throughout learning these credit bubbles is that corporate credit was the balloon. Corporate credit was the big balloon that occurred. There was a large amount of private equity and private credit, shadow banks that were underwriting these. And to me, it's very obvious. So I was like, oh, wow, this is like where the contraction is going to occur. It's going to spill. I can short instruments directly related to that. And as I learned that, I was shorting HYG and JNK. So it was roughly about 2019. And just to add to, going into COVID was another big part of this. So I was shorting, I had puts on HYG, I think about 10 grand, which at the time I was like, okay, I understand how this works. I'm going to do it. I'm going to take the risk. Like, this is what it's about. And then at the time, I was actually right on the trade directionally for a while. And that was like this is my first like macro discretionary trade I did. And I was right for a while. I was like, oh, wow. Like, all the years of knowledge, kind of studying and just getting a bit more intuitive understanding of the economic system, it worked. And as I continued, not in my calculus about how it was going to play out, the Federal Reserve violated the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 and started buying corporate credit bonds and floating the market. So totally nuked my trade, totally nuked the sentiment on that short of the trade broad market wise. And then there was, just to add matters worse, there was also traders inside these institutions that they were front running the Federal Reserve buying, which you could say is this crazy money making and capital siphoning that's not actually productive, but financial markets, whatever. That's how it works. So anyways, that was my corporate puberty moment. I think I lost about $6,000 or so on that trade at the end of the day. But it taught me a lot. And it was one of my big moments before I kind of started learning other elements. It's really the story of what made me a Bitcoiner at first. Really value the core tenets of Bitcoin and scarcity, no human manipulation on the supply, Austrian economics, and yeah. So even to this day, it's still an element I remember, but about not knowing what can happen. So I hope this was useful for you, and I'm excited for you to follow along. Hopefully like and subscribe, help me boost these channels I'm trying to build, and let me know anything I can do if you have knowledge how to make these videos better, anything I should do, I'd be very helpful or grateful. Thank you.